Welcome to the Heritage Toronto ITour of Spadina Avenue. We're going to take you up and down Spadina to talk about the rich history of the street. But first we're going to hear from Jennifer Torrey, RBC Regional President for the Greater Toronto Region. RBC Foundation is a generous supporter of Heritage Toronto's new ITour program.
Thank you for joining us today on this excursion to explore Toronto's heritage. From the time we opened our very first branch in 1903 on the corner of Yonge and Wellington, RBC Royal Bank's journey has been one of partnering with other prominent city builders to help create this strong and diverse metropolis. RBC, our clients and our employees share a deep affection for this great city. We take pride in our long and continuing chapter in Toronto's story, from building new branches to building careers to building communities through our countless philanthropic activities that enrich our city, like being the biggest corporate supporter of United Way, helping organizations welcome newcomers to Canada, as well as sponsoring these podcasts to share our strong shared history. Whether you're new in town or a local like me who is seeing the city through new eyes, I hope you enjoy taking in the sights and sounds of Toronto, past and present. I invite you to let your imaginations run wild as we step back through time to discover our diverse history and hear the tales of this vibrant city. Finally, as you wander through our neighborhoods, keep an eye out on every street corner for an RBC footprint. From the interesting architectural styles spanning the decades showcased in our local branches, to the famous gold Royal Bank Plaza towers on Bay Street, to community events like the Toronto Film Festival, Winter City, and RBC Daisy Fest. RBC is truly privileged to be part of the local landscape and to help tell Toronto's stories today. We look forward to helping create many more tales and working together to build this great city. I hope you enjoy your tour.
Welcome to the Heritage Toronto ITour of Spadina. We're going to take you up and down Spadina and talk about the rich cultural history of the street. First, we'll hear from Toronto City Councillor Vaughan, who represents Trinity Spadina, and from Rick Salutin, columnist for the Globe and Mail and a passionate Torontonian with deep roots in the neighbourhood. They'll give us an overview of the area, and while they're talking, you can do some walking. Stroll the streets, starting anywhere you like. Your narrated tour will begin shortly, and at that time we'll ask you to head to Queen and Spadina to begin your walk. During the podcast tour, we encourage you to put the podcast on hold and explore the sites in detail. When you're ready to proceed, just hit play again and continue with the tour.
You've had this history and this intersection of working class aspiration, of new entrepreneurial spirit, of cultural exploration, where the rules and the norms of society have been challenged continuously. And that's part of the history and the character of Spadina.
I think of Spadina as a kind of an ongoing debate. I mean, what I was told was that the workers would pour out of the factories at lunch hour and congregate on the street corners when they'd get into arguments with each other. So it was all left-wing, or almost all left-wing. So you'd have the Communist Party arguing against the anarchists, or arguing against the Zionists or the labor Zionists, and that was entertainment.
You have this incredible street traffic, these wide, beautiful, generous sidewalks that allow you to create open-air market conditions. And you've got great revenue streams from the buildings. The warehouses have had this remarkable second life. These buildings are extremely usable buildings and are reinvented decade after decade after decade. And that's part of the magic of how Victorian streetscapes function in Toronto. It's why they're so profoundly important to preserve. So there's no reason to demolish them, because they work, and they work on so many levels: economic, architecturally, socially, culturally. They just work.
I mean, Spadina is it breaks the mold of the Toronto street grid, and the street has always been less orderly.
There is a 24-hour cycle of life on Spadina. It's because you get a great daytime crowd, a great nighttime crowd, and if you want, an after-hours club as well. Where Laterry's is, at the corner of Spadina and Queen, there used to be an amazing speakeasy there. I mean, I remember David Bowie walking in at one point, and then taking the stage. It was that kind of atmosphere. And as I said, you can go back and talk to the old-timers. They'll tell you it was Duke Ellington, when Duke Ellington was the man of the moment. The place had has always had an extraordinary nightlife.
There was the Waverley Hotel, where my friend Milton Acorn, the poet, lived for years in a wretched room. I mean, Milton was a great poet, but he was somewhat distracted, and he would. But he's written some wonderful stuff about Spadina Avenue. He wrote a wonderful poem called "Knowing I Live in a Dark Age," in which he says, "I am less distracted by gunshots in the avenue than by the newsy with chapped hands running after a shabby poet to hand him his change." That was his sense of the decency of people on Spadina.
Why should we single out Spadina as a remarkable street in the city? Typical of Toronto, Spadina is an exceptional street that has been enriched over and over by the many waves of people to have inhabited it. The very name Spadina stands out from the surrounding street names in Toronto's downtown that are of obvious British origin. From the Ojibwe language, Spadina means house on the hill, and Dr. William Warren Baldwin laid out this avenue as Toronto's grandest and longest driveway. You can see if you look north. The hill is such a long way off that it is not visible. What has been so special about Spadina from the very beginning is its width. Spadina is 160 feet wide, expanded from an original 131 feet, which feels extensive today, and in 1813 would have seemed gigantic. Why such a wide street? We can only speculate. A vision for Toronto's Fifth Avenue? An attempt to raise the property values along the street for pieces of Dr. Warren's large lot that he wanted to sell? Dr. Baldwin was given the privilege of owning much of the western edge of early 19th century Toronto, then called York, due to fortunate circumstances. Baldwin served as physician to Peter Russell's family, who was president of legislature of Upper Canada and one of the jurisdiction's most senior officials. Dr. Baldwin, in addition to receiving one of the long lots that started at Queen and ran north for kilometers, also acquired additional large plots of land through marrying one of the Russell daughters, Phoebe. Look out for her street on the right. Baldwin, in his design for Spadina, gave Toronto one of its most fascinating street patterns, Spadina Crescent, a circle that Baldwin intended as a public park. You can see it when you look straight up the street, and we'll have more on that when we get there at the end of the tour. Please now ensure that you are standing on Queen Street West, north side, across from 489 Queen West, just at the corner of Queen and Vignali Street. Oddfellows Hall, 489 Queen Street West. Across the street we can see a building that tells its own story better than any other on this tour. Look up to that third story. Do you see some terracotta symbols engraved into the side of the building? These symbols all contain musical instruments, intertwined with workers' tools. This was the Oddfellows Hall, a men's fraternity built in 1886. The men worked in trade jobs that would have used the working tools, and by night they would have danced to the music of these instruments. The top floor is especially tall to allow for singing, dancing, and socializing. Cibc Building, Queen Street West. When you're done at the hall, walk east along Queen Street West, stopping at the northwest corner of Queen and Spadina. Look across the corner to the Cibc Building on the northeast corner. This building has stood the test of time as few others have on this tour. It was built as the Bank of Hamilton in 1902, and it worked so well that it still stands to this day as the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. Cross Spadina Avenue and walk east across the street to the Cibc Building. Then turn north on Spadina until you come to the southeast corner of Spadina and Phoebe, and look across the street. Can you see the fur shop that is in a rundown old house? Imagine that 19th century Spadina would have been exclusively houses before any of these giant industrial buildings moved in. This photo gives a glance into pre-industrial Spadina, when residents could have enjoyed a beautiful, wide, tree-lined boulevard, most likely from the comfort of their horse and carriage. Continue north of Spadina on the east side of the street to 250 in Spadina. Look at the lobby of this building, and we can see that the visionaries of Toronto did not die in the 19th century. This lobby is a testament to the creativity that thrives in Toronto in the early 21st century. Feel free to take in the bio wall and read about it on the northern wall of the lobby. Also take a few seconds to read through the list of building occupants. All sorts of wonderful creative and charitable organizations work here and give Toronto the creative ideas that make the city special. Continue north up Spadina to 239 and 241, formerly the Consolidated Glass Building. Step back to the edge of the sidewalk and try to look at this building from a few different vantage points. This building was designed by Pittsburgh architect William Steele in 1910 for the Consolidated Plate Glass Company. On the ornate gates, you can still make out the letters CPG. The Beaux Arts building facade is of terracotta, red sandstone, and brick. Continue north on Spadina until you reach the thriving corner of Dundas and Spadina. Take a pause and look north across Dundas Street to the rear of the building now occupied by the Royal Bank, and note the large ceilinged elevation that protrudes from there. This is the performance space of what used to be the Mandarin Theater. We'll return to the Mandarin in a moment. Now cross Spadina, heading west, and then cross again to the northwest corner of Dundas and Spadina. Once you're done taking in Chinatown's busiest intersection of pedestrian traffic, perhaps Toronto's, perhaps even all of Canada's busiest, take in the Scotiabank in front of you. It's a building that gives the urban historian the most valuable clue in the world, an actual date. Before we tell you when this bank was built, why don't you take a look and try to guess? Is this consistent with 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s architecture? Now go around to the south side of the building at the west end. You should see your answer if you look up. Not looking too bad for a building of its age, The moral here is that the money business is the only one that truly stands the test of time. Once you've seen the date on the Scotiabank building, walk back east and look across Spadina, towards the east, at what is now the Royal Bank's front. This was the main entrance to the Mandarin Theater. The first buildings on this particular corner were a church, and later a residential home, and at the end of the 1910s it was knocked down to make way for the Standard Theater. The building was redesigned by Benjamin Brown, and it opened for business in 1921, hosting some of the best Yiddish theater anywhere outside of Europe. Brown himself is notable as Toronto's first Jewish architect. He graduated from the University of Toronto in 1913 and had completed 9 major buildings by 1930. Further down Spadina Avenue, south of Adelaide Street, the Tower, Fashion and Balfour buildings are all his designs. The theater was financed entirely by the local Jewish community, who bought shares in the property and business. Comedy, drama, and tragedy were all presented on a regular basis, with touring companies and local groups both putting on dramatic presentations in Yiddish. Even the plays of Shakespeare and Strindberg were presented here in the Yiddish tongue to a very receptive audience. The Standard Theater also participated in the politics of the day, hosting its share of political rallies and becoming an epicenter for the theater of action put on by the Progressive Arts Club, a left-wing group who liked their theater to carry a weighty message amongst its drama. Through events like these and in the hosting of left-wing rallies in a language other than English, an offense at the time, the theater got a reputation with the police, and there were numerous raids and arrests which led to the Progressive Arts Club being banned from the premises. With its political overtones dampened by the authorities, the building was renamed the Strand Theater and became a full movie house, and in 1945 it was renamed the Victory and quickly became a burlesque theater, and for 30 years entertained many generations of university students. In 1975, the building was purchased by a Chinese entrepreneur and began showing Chinese-language cinema and was renamed the Golden Harvest Theater, and then the Mandarin Theater, before the projector finally went dark in the 1990s and the building was broken up into several smaller business spaces. Remain on the northwest corner of Dundas and Spadina and look south at the tall shopping center across from you. Now imagine that it wasn't there, and in its place was a large church that took up most of the present-day mall's lot. It was St. Elizabeth of Hungary Church, dedicated in that name in 1943. During 1956, the Hungarian population of Canada, and particularly Toronto, skyrocketed due to the Hungarian Revolution against Russian occupation in October of that year. The church became the religious and social center for Toronto's effort to help the newly arrived Hungarian refugees, and it was often their first point of contact. The Canadian-Hungarian Federation had their first headquarters here. With the migration and dispersal of the Hungarian community in subsequent decades, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Toronto sold the church, and it was demolished and replaced by the shopping mall in the late 1980s. Now start walking north on Spadina, remaining on the west side of the street. As we continue our walk north, have a look at the laneway halfway up the block, called Glen Bailey Place. Walk down it right to the end. Isn't it remarkable that there are houses here? These houses follow a style that is consistent with the period from 1900 to the start of World War I. These were probably built by the newly arrived laborers who came to work in the surrounding garment industry buildings. Take a look to the south at one of the buildings that fronts onto Spadina. It is easy to see how such buildings could have once served as the heart of Toronto's once bustling textile industry. Once leaving Glen Bailey Place, continue north on Spadina to the southwest corner of St. Andrew and Spadina, and look back at the colorful buildings with two lions. This is probably the most difficult bit of historical imagining that we'll ask of you. This building's origins are as two houses, in fact, that housed the Labor Lyceum. This organization was sought to promote trade unionism and included several international needle trade unions. International Ladies Garment Workers, ILGWU, Cloak Makers and Dressmakers, Amalgamated Clothing Workers, Fur Workers, and the Hat, Cap, and Millinery Workers Union. The two houses were renovated in 1929, and in 1950 the Lyceum added a second-floor dance hall that now houses the Bright Pearl restaurant. In 1972, the Lyceum moved to 23 Cecil Street, a few blocks northeast of here. Since then, the building underwent a renovation to its current Oriental theme and has been occupied by a series of Oriental restaurants. However, we can see the traces of the old building if we walk along St. Andrew to the back side. Keep walking around the building to the back alley, and you'll note the end of the facade, which is wrapped around the building like it's a wrapped gift. From the rear of the Labor Lyceum, continue west into Kensington Market, and walk west on St. Andrew to the corner of St. Andrew and Kensington Avenue. As you walk west, take note of the Minsker Synagogue on the north side of St. Andrew, built by the Beth Israel Anshi Minsk congregation, who were founded in Kensington in 1912, and in 1930 built the Minsker on land previously occupied by two houses owned by congregation members. Its congregation continues to be active, and it's a strong symbol of Kensington's long-time Jewish population. Kensington was first established by the Denison family, from property they'd originally held as their own estate. After they sold off the property, homes were built through the area, and if you look up and down Kensington Avenue, you'll note one of the largest existing stretches of bay and gable design in Toronto. In 1900, Orthodox Jews began arriving in the area as they arrived from Europe and from the Ward, Toronto's first major Jewish community in the Dundas University area. With its low dwellings and village-like atmosphere, Kensington appealed to the newly arrived Jews with the flavor and style of a village or a shtetl. Many of the Jews who arrived from Europe came from smaller villages and towns that all had central marketplaces, and Kensington provided that kind of comfort to them. It was also a secure and friendly environment for Jewish immigrants, who weren't always welcome elsewhere in the city. By 1913, the Jewish population of the area had risen from 3,000 in 1900 to more than 32,000 people. Jews who lived in Kensington would often establish their own businesses. The small storefronts were a natural fit for independent businesses, and it was easier for Orthodox Jews to observe the Sabbath if they were working as their own bosses. The market would usually close completely Fridays at dusk and reopen Saturday nights. By 1931, 80% of Toronto's Jews lived in or near Kensington Market, and it was an area known for its tolerance. Indeed, it housed the only hotel in Toronto that would take black guests. Bylaws were gradually bent as the Victorian homes that lined Kensington Avenue were bought and renovated, acquiring storefronts and upstairs apartments. As you look up and down Kensington Avenue, you can still see those storefronts, now mostly second-hand clothing shops. After the war, the Jewish population of Kensington declined, and by 1961 was significantly reduced as new communities, notably the Portuguese, began settling there as the newest people to Canada, using the framework established by the Jews to continue Kensington's small village feel. Walk across Kensington Avenue, heading west, and walk into Kensington Place, an alley that moves perpendicular to Kensington Avenue. As you come to the end of the alley, take note of the row houses, a stark contrast to the higher-end gabled housing that exists on Kensington Avenue. These homes were built originally as worker housing, and the 1910 directory of the area has at least 5 Jewish families living here, all of them workers in the garment department at Eaton's. As you emerge from Baldwin Street onto Spadina, take a moment at the northwest corner of Baldwin and Spadina and have a look to the east at the Liquor Control Board of Ontario building, also known as the Lcbo. Prior to becoming a liquor store, this was the Paramount Hotel, a local watering hole and a notable gathering spot for African Canadians, specifically those from the Maritimes. Walk north on Spadina and cross to the east side. using the crosswalk at Nassau, and continue north on Spadina until you're in front of Grossman's Tavern. Originally built as two large houses in the 1880s, these houses were combined in the 1950s and a front added to create Grossman's Cafeteria, a kosher restaurant. In 1957, Grossman secured a liquor license, which was hard won after several years of objections from local churches. As the back end of the Jewish community moved on, Grossman's began catering to the very heavy Hungarian clientele, the majority of whom were part of the post-revolution influx of Hungarian immigrants we mentioned earlier. With the Hungarian clientele came live music, and it quickly became a facet of the establishment. After the Hungarians were the hippies, and at the same time the American draft dodgers. Grossman's became a regular haunt for those Americans who had decided to avoid the Vietnam War, and then evolved again to become the main watering hole for the movement to stop the construction of the Spadina Expressway. Throughout this time, the music continued, going from Hungarian fiddle music to rock and roll and eventually blues, which Grossman continues to present to this day as one of Toronto's premier authentic live blues venues. Continuing north of Spadina, stop and look to the west to 450 Spadina, formerly known as the Alhambra Theater, and now a billiard hall. First named Broadway Hall, the theater was built in the 1880s, and the downstairs of the building housed a dry goods merchant. Upstairs, various Christian groups, the Women's Christian Temperance Union amongst them, would use the theater space to hold meetings and services. As the area changed after the turn of the century and the Jewish community, and left-wing and union politics with it, began to move to the area en masse, the Broadway Hall began to host events of a more political nature. Renamed the Alhambra in the 1920s, the theater continued its usage as a gathering place for the left-wing community, and even doubled as a gymnasium for the Workers' Sports Association. In 1925, the Freedom Choral Society was formed by a group of musically inclined Jewish factory workers, and they used the Alhambra for rehearsals and for their annual spring concert. Later renamed the Toronto Jewish Folk Choir, the group expanded its repertoire and venues, and even went so far as to play concerts at Massey Hall, with notable guests like the great African-American singer, actor, and activist Paul Robeson. January of 1929 saw the theater hosting one of its best-known political events, a conference for free speech, decrying the law that prevented meetings to be held in any language but English, the law that had so badly hindered the meetings held at the Standard Theater down the street. The conference saw speakers as generationally diverse as the then-aged J.S. Woodsworth, the social activist founder of the CCF, which later became the New Democratic Party, and a very young Stanley Knowles, a member of Parliament for both the CCF and the NDP in the Canadian Parliament for almost 40 years. Various businesses continued to occupy the ground floor throughout this time. In the 1930s, the hall had been renamed again, this time as the Spadina Concert Hall. And as the Jewish and left-wing communities began to move from Spadina and Kensington in the 1940s, the space was redesigned and the theater converted to the billiard hall that occupies it now. Retail spaces continued to occupy the downstairs to this day. Remain in your current place on the sidewalk and look a little farther to the north of the Alhambra Hall. Immediately next to the billiard hall is the Elma Tavern, one of Toronto's most infamous rock and roll bars. Originally a commercial property, it housed dry goods stores, a barber shop, and a post office before being purchased and turned into a restaurant in 1946. Alcohol was forbidden in restaurants at that time, but the owners were able to take advantage of an initiative by the Ontario Liquor Licensing Board to create a more American-style drinking establishment, and were given one of the city's first liquor licenses. The owners were then sent on a tour of American cities, paid for by the Commission, to get a sense of the American style of drinking. The name Elma and the overall Spanish style came from the large number of similarly themed clubs in the United States. The neon palm sign dates back that far too, and was part of the original decor when it first opened its doors as a bar. In 1972, the property was purchased and turned into a two-story music venue. Bands would often be playing on both floors nightly, and the venue gained a reputation, hosting such acts as Elvis Costello, Rough Trade, Tina Turner, Blondie, and the Cars. The usual pattern of an evening would feature a better-known headliner upstairs, while lesser-known local bands, usually several bands put on back-to-back, would perform downstairs. The club's best-known moment came over 2 nights in March of 1977, when the Rolling Stones played and recorded their live album Love You Live. Not only was their appearance there notorious, but it sent the country into a tailspin at the time when Margaret Trudeau, the wife of the then Prime Minister, turned up as their personal guest. In 2001, the Elma combo was sold. The upstairs bar was transformed into a dance school and private performance space, and the downstairs was revitalized, with the neon palm sign being re-electrified. Continue on Spadina to the east side and across College Street. Immediately in front of you is a 7-Eleven convenience store, housed in what was once a tip-top tailor's garment factory. From 1875 onward, the land was used for a series of Methodist churches, and the existing structure was built in 1934, and is another design by Toronto architect Benjamin Brown, who also designed the Mandarin Theater. Tip-Top moved in and occupied this space for a number of years before it was broken into rental offices and retail units. Continue north on the east side of Spadina until you are across from the large Silver Dollar sign on the west side. This is the Silver Dollar Room, part of the Waverley Hotel, and another key part of Toronto's musical history. The structure dates back to 1900, when the YMCA that occupied it was torn down to make room for the hotel. It enjoyed several occupants over the years on top of its hotel business, most notably the Toronto Tourist and Convention Association in the 1920s. The Silver Dollar was added in 1958 and was another Spadina location that acquired an early City of Toronto liquor license. As the neighborhood shifted, so did the clientele at the Waverley and the Silver Dollar, moving through Jewish, Hungarian, and African-Canadian customers throughout the 1970s, when it became more popular with the lower-income groups that started to frequent the area after the Scott Mission relocated. The Silver Dollar picked up a lot of good rock and blues music along the way, and continues to be another premier venue for the blues. Remain where you're standing and look a little bit further to the north, to the Scott Mission. The Scott Mission has actually existed since 1912, when it was set up in the Ward, Toronto's first major Jewish area before Kensington. At that point, the community was already well on the move to Kensington, and the Presbyterian Mission to the Hebrew people of Toronto, as it was then known, operated as a Christian synagogue, which attempted to convert the Jews who sought its charity to Christianity. One of its converts took over and renamed it the Scott Institute in 1921. It continued to operate in a variety of locations and provided relief for those in need through the Depression. When it was condemned by the Presbyterian Church for providing more help to people than converting them, its original director resigned and reopened the Scott Mission, which moved to its current location on Spadina in 1948 and began operating as a non-denominational, strongly evangelical facility. The building you see today was erected in 1960 after the old mission was torn down. It continues to serve the city's poor and homeless with nightly beds and warm meals. Continue north on Spadina as it moves into being Spadina Circle and stop on the northwest corner of the circle. Looking directly west, you'll note the unique-looking structure of the Lord Lansdowne School. The site has housed a school since 1888, when it opened as Lansdowne School, and it was immediately filled with 945 students spread over just 12 rooms. The school continued to expand and was finally torn down in 1961 and was replaced with the very 60s-looking building you now see and was renamed Lord Lansdowne School. With regard to the building's unique look, the round design was actually very purposeful in its intent to reduce the amount of land usage and maximize its interior space, perhaps a memory of the school's original overcrowding. Turn yourself back around and look at the large steepled building in front of you. This is Knox College. The circle it stands on was originally open land, used as gardens and known first as Mansfield Old Gardens and later Crescent Garden. It was deeded by William Baldwin to the city as a park, but was later sold to the University of Toronto by his granddaughter in 1873. Knox College was built there at that time. It was the University of Toronto's Presbyterian College and continued to use that location until 1906, when it moved elsewhere on the campus. The building was then left disused for several years, and in a strange parallel to the anti-big box movements of today, was considered for a department store. But public opinion about its possible and other uses kept big business at bay. In 1916, the college went back into heavy use as a military hospital, and Amelia Earhart, the pioneering female pilot famously known for her mysterious disappearance over the Pacific Ocean, worked as a nurse for a time. During the Depression, the building was slated for demolition, this time to turn it into an arena, but the university again decided against getting rid of it and instead installed the Connaught Laboratories there to produce the newly discovered drug penicillin. The work at Connaught Labs also led to the discovery of the polio virus, found in this very building in front of you. It continues to be used by the university to this day for various offices, departments, and facilities. Continue walking along the circle, keeping Knox College at your left until you come to the northeast corner of the circle. The building in front of you is also part of the University of Toronto, but was first built as the city dairy. If you look down the driveway leading into the building off Spadina Circle, you can still see where the horse-drawn milk carts would load their cans for delivery. It was later acquired by Borden Dairies, who opened an ice cream factory in the building as well, and for a time the structure featured a giant milk bottle on the roof. Dairy operations ceased at that location in the 1950s, and it was purchased by the university and turned into offices, labs, and classrooms for several departments, as well as housing the University Women's Center. And now, standing with your back to the dairy, look at the back of Knox College and imagine what William Warren Baldwin would have thought about his creation if he were to stand there, on the site of his planned garden and park, and see Spadina Avenue today. Though the street goes farther than the portion we covered in this tour, we have definitely covered the area that has seen some of the most important changes and has been at the forefront of so many of Toronto's leaps in progress over the years.
This Heritage Toronto iTour was written by Heritage Toronto volunteers Fraser Robinson and Josef Szende, based on research generously provided by Marguerite Newell of the Grange Historical Society and Gunter, Professor Emeritus at the University of Toronto. Heritage Toronto volunteer Lee Rickwood researched the images, which are from the City of Toronto archives. Thanks also goes to Ward 20's Councillor Vaughan and journalist and playwright Rick Salutin for their fascinating personal insights into the neighborhood. The tour was produced by Popstream Digital for Heritage Toronto and was financially supported by the RBC Foundation. Please visit our website for more information on Heritage Toronto.